Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapashantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We begin a new section today, the section that deals with the teacher and the student. So we start today on verse number 32. Ukta sadhana sampannaha tattva jidnyasuratmanaha upasidet gurum pradnyam yasmat bandha vimokshanam. Equipped with the practices described above, the disciple seeking the knowledge of the Atman should take refuge in an enlightened teacher who can bestow freedom from bondage. So this verse is a bridge that connects the previous section with the section that we are going to study. So in the earlier section, we studied the 4 basic practices that are expected of every Vedanta student. Those 4 practices, in short, are discernment, viveka, detachment, vairagya. Then there is this set of 6 practices called the 6 treasures. That is the 3rd. And the 4th is mumukshutvam, or the intense longing for freedom. So in order for our study and practice of Vedanta to become fruitful and meaningful, we must have these 4. Now it's not expected that every one of us will have these 4 in their fullest measure. If we have them, that's great. That means we are the fittest students of Vedanta. And if we have these in the fullest measure, we probably may not need any spiritual practice at all. It's like a fruit which is just ripe. So in these ancient books, they say that all that such a student who is just ready for enlightenment, who has all these 4 basic practices to perfection, this student simply has to go to the teacher. The teacher looks at the student, sees that the student is ready, and the teacher tells the student, you are that. In Sanskrit, called Tat Tvam Asi. And because the student is ready, just hearing these words from the teacher, immediately the student experiences Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. I am the Infinite One. Done. Nothing more to do. Now, if we look at our own lives, we might discover that we have all of these 4, but perhaps not to their fullest measure. And that's okay. It means that we are a work in progress, that our first target, if you want to use that word, in spiritual life would be to make myself the fittest student. Sometimes we might say, well, all that I want is enlightenment, and that's true, of course. Everyone, for a Vedanta student, that's what every Vedanta student would want. But considering that I cannot have enlightenment unless I become fully fit, it makes more practical sense to say, first, let me strive to perfect myself in these 4 basic practices. Because once I perfect myself in them, the next step is easy. Just listening to the words of the teacher and becoming enlightened. So that is why this verse begins by saying, equipped with the practices described above. And I just wanted to therefore emphasize in that word equipped, that you could be equipped 100% or 70%, 80%, 30%. To some measure, we should have something that these 4 practices require. So once we are equipped with them, then the disciple, seeking the knowledge of the Atman. All of these topics will be discussed in much greater detail later on, but I'll just mention them very briefly. The knowledge of the Atman, knowledge is primarily of 2 kinds. One is the kind of knowledge we are getting right now through this study. This is knowledge that is coming from a book. It is being heard from a teacher, and it is being processed through the mind and the senses. Our senses are involved because when you read a book, you hold a book and read it, our hands, our eyes, they are involved. When we try to understand what the verses mean, our mind and intellect are involved. So the knowledge that we are getting now is mediated, is filtered through the senses and the mind and the intellect. And that's good, that's important. Nevertheless, it is still indirect knowledge. It is indirect knowledge because it is filtered. The Sanskrit word for this kind of an indirect knowledge is paroksha jnana. Jnana is knowledge. Paroksha is indirect. Indirect knowledge has a lot of advantages for us because we find through the study of books, through discussions, many of our doubts are resolved. Not all, but many. Many of our questions get answered. Again, not all. So that's a good thing. But this indirect knowledge itself, by itself, cannot lead to enlightenment. Something more is needed. What we need is direct knowledge. Knowledge that doesn't go through the mind and the senses and intellect. Right now, for instance, the knowledge of our own existence. Every one of us is aware that I exist. Now, in order for me to know that I exist, I don't need my mind and the senses. That's the knowledge of my own existence is a direct knowledge. I don't need to look at it into any books to know whether I exist or not. But that I'm an infinite being, that I'm immortal, the kind of attributes sometimes given to a spirit as distinguished from the perishable objects of the world, that is something we are reading in books. Right now, we don't feel we are immortal. We don't feel we are infinite. So some of our knowledge, the knowledge of our existence is direct right now, but the other parts of our knowledge are still very indirect. So the disciple seeking the knowledge of the Atman, this is seeking the direct knowledge of the Atman. But in order to get the direct knowledge, oftentimes, though not always, indirect knowledge becomes a preliminary step. I wouldn't say it's an absolute necessity, because there have been cases, and there will be cases of people who didn't read any scriptures, who were not intellectuals by any standard, and yet they became enlightened. So, how vital indirect knowledge is not a question that is easy to answer. Is study of these ancient texts absolutely necessary? I would say no. Is it helpful? Absolutely, it's certainly helpful. So, keeping that in mind, we should see when the book says, the verse says, the disciple seeking the knowledge of the Atman should take refuge, that is, go and seek knowledge. Now, taking refuge involves recognizing one's vulnerability in some way. It's only when there is a big storm and we know that where we are staying, that house may not be able to withstand these 150 miles per hour winds, then we go and take refuge in some shelter, knowing that the shelter is strong enough to keep me safe. So a spiritual seeker sometimes might see that this storm of worldliness, that this getting sucked into this perishable material universe, and you can see how much of our lives, how much of our time, how much of our energy throughout the day is focused on things of the world, things which are here today, gone tomorrow, things which are perishable. The problems which seem immense at the moment, most of the problems which seem like big deal, within 3 months or 6 months you look back at them and you're just, maybe many of them you're just forgotten that they were even problems. And some of the problems you might remember and you would just laugh it off and say, oh my God, I was so worried, and it turned out it wasn't a big deal. But how much of our time, energy go behind dealing with these small and big problems, most of which we are able to, in retrospect, look back and laugh at? And how much of our time and energy is given to something that is imperishable, something that is eternal, something that is beyond? Come to think about it, how much of our lives should we give to things that will be with us maybe for the next 30, 40, 50 years, depending on our age? I mean, generally they say a human lifespan is give and take a few years around 100. If we are lucky enough, we might reach the three-digit figure. So all of us can calculate, depending on whatever age group we belong to, if we live this full span of life, how many more years we are likely to be on this planet. And what happens after that? Have I given any thought how much of my time and energy I'm investing into this vast time period beyond the next 30, 40, or 50 years of my life? And think about it this way. Now, thinking about the next 20 or 30 years might seem like, oh, it's a long time. But maybe not. If you look at the last 10 years or the last 20 years, we might discover that they have flown by pretty quickly. if the last 10 or 20 or 30 years have gone away, moved so quickly, there is no reason that the next 20 or 30 years are going to go any slower. So that's the kind of a trick time plays upon us. That if we look at the past, for me, I joined the monastery about 45 years ago. Even now, it just feels like I just joined the monastery just the other day. How quickly time can pass. But the beauty is that when you think of the next 10 years or 20 years or 30 years ahead, that seems like a long time. So when sometimes the books speak about the momentariness of life, that life is very evanescent, life is very fleeting, it's not just a metaphor, it's not just a figure of speech. It's literally true. And therefore, taking refuge, if we understand, will make better sense then. Once we realize how less time any of us has, irrespective of whatever age we are, how less time we have, and how much we need to accomplish in order to take care of this mysterious event called death. Yes, there are lots of things. The books say you go here, you go there, you go to heaven, you go this happens, that happens. Still, we don't know. We have died many times before, if you believe in the idea of rebirth. But we don't remember. And I think that's a blessing we don't remember. But sometimes they say that this instinctive fear of death that people have could be these subtle impressions of the many deaths we have had in our past lives. And at least some of those deaths must have been quite painful. And so that memory, those subtle impressions of those memories, perhaps has created this instinctive fear or dread or unpleasantness about the whole topic of death. So all of these thoughts should be at the back of our mind when we understand this word, should take refuge in an enlightened teacher who can bestow freedom from bondage. Now that's the bondage of time. We cannot stop time. We can pretend as if time doesn't move, but we cannot stop it. We are bound in the domain that's in Sanskrit, they call it Desha Kala Nimitta. The domain of space, the domain of time, and the domain of causality, cause and effect. Things come one after another. Effects follow cause. And when you say before, after, we are already assuming the existence of time. Our mind is incapable of thinking, of imagining, of conceptualizing anything that is beyond time, space, and causality. So either we can try to express that inexpressible thing through poetry, because sometimes poetry or songs or music can express what mere prose cannot. Or we find some books on mysticism which use language which sometimes is difficult to understand because the language is highly symbolical. Because we are trying to express what is something which is truly indescribable through language. So this bondage, think about it, right now, many people in many parts of the world are expressing bondage. Yes, there is lack or insufficient political freedom. There is bondage through economy, financial constraints people have. There are bondages in social and cultural ways. But when we think about these deeper subtler bondage, all of these other bondages appear to be very superficial. They are real. People are feeling, people are suffering due to them. It's true. But because our lives are spent dealing with these immediate problems that we have, very few have even the time and the interest and the depth to look at this basic problem, which is really the source of all these problems that we face on the daily basis. So once we become aware of that, then the heart would long from freedom from that bondage. That is what this verse says. Equipped with the practices described above, the disciple seeking the knowledge of the Atman should take refuge in an enlightened teacher who can bestow freedom from bondage. Verse 33. Shrotriyo avrujino akama hato yo brahmavittamaha brahmanyuparata shanto nirindhana ivanalaha ahetuka daya sindhu bandhuranamatam satam. The teacher is one who is an adept in the scriptures, free from vice, unaffected by desire, a profound knower of Brahman, immersed in Brahman, calm like the fire with depleted fuel, an ocean of unconditional compassion, and a friend to those who are good and humble. You will see throughout this book, this is a very common usages in Sanskrit. You will find in this book, there'll be a string of adjectives used. And so the sentence kind of sometimes when you translate it into English becomes a little unwieldy. But you can see the kind of qualities that this teacher is expected to have. Now, all of these characteristics of an ideal teacher that are mentioned here are all interrelated. For instance, one who is an adept in the scriptures. What makes a person an adept? That the word here is shrotriyaha. What makes a person being adept in a scripture means being able to understand the deep meaning of every word in the text. The ability, what sometimes we might say, of reading between the lines. So studying scriptures, it's not enough to just know the language. We must have that, that ability to understand the subtle nuances of these ideas. That is who an adept is. Now that becomes possible only when someone is free from vices. Because otherwise, any of these vices, any of these things that take away my mind from the highest truth is going to be an obstacle. So only one who is free from these distractions will be able to give their full mind, their full focus, their whole being to the study of the text. And that is what contributes in bringing a deeper understanding of that text. Now, because a person is free from vices, that is why this person is unaffected by desire. Now, as I have mentioned on other occasions, although desires sometimes get demonized in spiritual literature, we do not have so much freedom from what kind of desires come to mind. And that is because desires come from mental impressions, samskaras, which are already present in our heart. Now, these impressions are there in our heart as a result of our past actions. Actions done earlier in this life, or maybe even in previous lives. Now that's already been done. You cannot undo what's been done. And all of those past actions and thoughts have left these subtle impressions in the mind. Now these desires spring from these impressions. All that these impressions need is some kind of a trigger. That trigger can be internal through memories or external. For instance, if I love drinking coffee, then every time I drink coffee, that's an action, and it leaves a subtle impression in my mind, say a coffee samsara, a coffee impression. Now, next time when I go for a morning walk and I'm passing by Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, just seeing that place, that is enough of a trigger for this impression in my mind to come up as a desire, say, oh, it's so cold, let me just go and drink a cup of coffee. You cannot stop that desire because the impression is already there. Now, where is my freedom? My freedom is whether my will, my power of the will grab that desire and convert it into an intention and then into an action. So when the desire comes, oh, here is Starbucks, let me go and have a cup of coffee. And my willpower says, oh, that's a great idea. So I grab that desire, an intention arises in the heart, I start walking towards it, I go inside, I get myself a cup of coffee, and I start sipping it and I feel happy. But in the process, I've already added one more impression now by this another cup of coffee that I'm having. So next day when I walk through the same road again and see the Starbucks again, the probability of those impressions triggering become a little bit more because I have an extra impression there now. That's how habits are formed. I keep on doing something, it keeps on generating more impressions, and therefore the desires keep coming up again and again. So the important point is, what it says here is, unaffected by desire. A desire can come in the hearts of all, people who are even advanced in spiritual life. But if I have a strong control over my will, that's why the importance of self-restraint. If I'm not so impulsive that every time a desire comes and I just run and say, this has got to be fulfilled, then I'm in deep trouble because I don't know. Not all desires are bad. Some desires may be good for me. But as soon as a desire comes in the heart, if I have enough presence of mind to just pause, look at that desire, ask myself whether fulfilling that desire will make me stronger in some way, either physically, mentally, morally, emotionally, or at the very least will not weaken me in any way. And if the answer is yes, that's a good desire, of course. If I have a desire to take exercise every day, we can't say, oh, desires are bad, I shouldn't do it. Well, it's a good desire. It's good for my health. If I have a desire to eat healthy food, that's a good desire. So, unaffected by desire means that the desires don't dictate what my action should be, that I am the one who decides whether to say yes to a desire or no to a desire. That's where our freedom comes in. Now, when is it possible to remain unaffected by desire? It becomes so much more easier if you are a knower of Brahman. If my mind has been withdrawn sufficiently from these perishable things of this world and is thinking and is immersed in that immensity of reality. And when that happens, that is why the person is calm like the fire with depleted fuel. This is the imagery often used in the books. This is also there in an Upanishad called the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Just as fire, when the fuel is exhausted, the fire will die out. What keeps the fire going is fuel. So once the fire dies out, then there is calmness. So this fire of desire, therefore there is this one very beautiful verse in a book called the Bhagavata. It goes like this. Na jatu kama kamanam upabhogena shamyati havisha krishna vartmeva bhuya eva abhivardhate. And that is, it says, no desire can end through fulfillment. Sometimes we feel, I have this desire, and once that's done, I'm free from it. It seldom happens. If we fulfill the desire once, and you just feel good about it, you enjoy it, you cannot stop from the mind thinking, let me just have this desire fulfilled again. If you enjoy 1 cup of coffee and you have more time, you say, well, I'm just feeling good today, so why not just order another cup? That's how all of the habits build up. That's how people get addicted. It always starts with just one something. And then when you enjoy it, you say 2, 3, 4, and then that's how we build up. But now if that fuel is not added, so that verse says, fulfilling desires in order to get rid of them is like adding fuel into fire and hoping that the fire will die out. It's never going to die out. And that's why this imagery here, calm like the fire with depleted fuel, an ocean of unconditional compassion. Again, compassion can be conditional. I do this because I'm expecting this in return. Or I do this because I would want you to do this in return for me. But unconditional means I just do it as a free will offering. I don't expect anything. I don't impose any conditions. And a friend to those who are good and humble. A friend to those who are good and humble, why not, we might ask, a friend to the bad and the arrogant? Now that's a good question. It's not that this teacher is going to just throw away bad and arrogant people. But the idea here is that when the teacher gives teaching to a student, it's expected of a student to be good and humble. So this really shows the probability of receiving the teaching from the guru only if the guru finds the student to be good and humble. And that's why sometimes we find instances in spiritual texts of students approaching a teacher, and just as the students have the freedom to decide or to choose their teacher, the teacher also has the freedom to choose their students. So it's a act of freedom from both sides. There is no imposition of any kind. No one should tell any student who their teacher should be, and no one can tell any teacher who their student should be. There is this passage in the Upanishad called the Katha Upanishad, where we find there's another Upanishad, there is a dialogue between the teacher and a student. In the Katha Upanishad, the teacher is Yama, and the student is a young boy named Nachiketa. And this is the one phrase that is used in that Upanishad, which says, Ascharyo Vakta Kushalosya Labdha, which simply means if the teacher is wonderful and if the student is wonderful, then there is a true flowering of knowledge. So that is the idea that will come in this section that we are seeing. Both have to be fit. Then the transfer of spiritual knowledge that goes from teacher to the student is truly meaningful and fruitful. And so now that we are studying the characteristics of a teacher, later on the text will also describe the characteristic of the student. So the teacher is one who is an adept in the scriptures, free from vice, unaffected by desire, a profound knower of Brahman, immersed in Brahman, calm like the fire with depleted fuel, an ocean of unconditional compassion, and a friend to those who are good and humble. Next verse. Tamaradya gurum bhaktya pravha prashraya sevanaihi prasannam tam anuprapya pruched jnatavyam. Worshipping with devotion, prostration, and humble service, the disciple should please the teacher and ask about whatever needs to be known. Now these three, devotion, prostration, and humble service, are considered to be means of self-purification. Devotion, it strengthens faith. Prostration is surrender of the ego. See, bowing down before a teacher, bowing down before anyone, really. People who are very egoistic, they find it difficult to bow down. And it's not that we have to bow down before anybody and everybody. But if we truly feel that sense of humility within, then prostration, whether you prostrate when you go to a temple or a place of worship before the altar of those whom you respect and revere, that kind of a prostration is a helpful practice to strengthen our humility, to kind of knock the ego a little bit on the head. Because the greatest hurdle to enlightenment is this egoism, more accurately. And so whatever keeps us humble. Now, it's not just a physical activity of prostrating. It's not even using the language which shows, oh, how humble I am. All those are pretty external. Humility is from basically within the heart. And if there is true humility within, the words that we use, the way we speak, whatever we do, that will be an outward expression of that inner humility. Because just an outward show of humility, that doesn't help. It's possible to be extremely arrogant and egoistic and outwardly be very humble. And that's phony. That can be easily be detected, who is truly humble and who is not. But that's the thing. So while prostration, etc., might seem to be doing something physically outwardly, but it's important to remember that it's primarily an internal thing. In fact, an authentic life really means that what we are outside is an expression of who we are inside, or what the values that we hold. Otherwise, life gets divided. There's one face we show to the world outside, and there is some other thing going on inside. And that's kind of a divided life. And in lesser or greater degree, either due to the social, cultural requirements of the communities of which we are a part, sometimes we might be forced to say or live or do in a way that may not reflect who we are internally. And that does create a kind of a division between our external persona and our internally who we are. And that does therefore oftentimes lead to stress and tension. So we have to find a way. Again, not all of this is due to our being or doing. Sometimes we might be helpless in certain situations. But sooner or later, we might have to find a way to lead completely undivided lives. That what I am outside, who I am outside, is who I am inside. Because when that distinction goes away, that my words, my actions, my relationships are all an outward expression of who I am within, that would be a completely authentic life. And that authenticity is very important in spiritual life. It truly accelerates our spiritual progress. The disciple should please the teacher and ask about whatever needs to be known. Let's look at the next verse, 35. The next few verses are what the disciple says to the teacher. And you can see, well, we will come to it. Let me read the verse first. Swami namaste nataloka bandho karunya sindho patitam bhavabdho mamuddhara atmiya kataksha drishtya rujvyati karunya sudhabhivrishtya. O Master, I bow down to you, a friend of the lowly and an ocean of compassion. Fallen as I have in the sea of the world, please rescue me by your loving glance which showers the nectar of supreme compassion. Now, as a form of a literary device, this is a very kind of an oriental hyperbole, kind of a very ornamental language in some ways. It might even seem rather unnatural or rather over-dramatized way of speaking, because in our lifetime we don't normally address each other in such poetic way, unless sometimes people might even think that somebody is being very sarcastic if you start using phrases like this in conversation. So it's important to remember here that these don't necessarily reflect the actual words that the student used before the teacher. What this reflects is if the heart of the disciple would speak, this is what the heart would speak. And heart is not bound by what kind of usage is accepted and not. You see, sometimes, especially when we are overcome with strong feelings of love, understanding, gratitude, the heart will be so filled that when we have to speak about it, many of us might kind of hold ourselves a little bit, because then we also become aware of what is the right way to speak, what's an accepted usage. And so sometimes when we express ourselves, we may not be fully expressing the overflowing feelings of the heart. Or sometimes it could just be inability to express. Maybe our language skills are not strong enough. Maybe the language itself is not powerful enough to express the immensity of our feelings. So these words should be understood in that sense, that this is what the heart of the disciple is saying. The disciple is aware that I am just about to get drowned in the sea of the world. And here is this teacher whom I trust, in whom I'm taking refuge, who will help me cross this ocean. Verse 36. Durvara samsara davagni taptam dodhuyamanam duradrushtavataihi bhitam prapannam paripahi mrityo sharanyamanyat yadaham na jane. I am being scorched in the uncontrollable forest fire of samsara, which is fed by the winds of my bad karma. Please protect me from death. I don't know anyone else in whom I can take refuge. So the word samsara will come again and again and again throughout this book. Etymologically, the word simply means samyak sarati, that which is constantly moving, constantly changing. So samsara refers to, therefore, this world of appearances, fleeting and continually changing. You see, the idea that there are these some fixed entities outside of us, living and non-living, a lot of that is just the default way our mind has thought of just accepting the reality. But essentially, what is happening is every time I see someone or something, it's just creating some sensation in my brain. And then I go to another place, different set of sensations. So throughout the day, we are just kind of accumulating these sensations of color, form, sound, touch, smell. And the sensations is all that we know. But somehow our mind has acquired the habit of thinking that a certain section or group of sensations is this particular object outside of me. Because we know in our lives, when we have moved from one place to another, one job to another, that people continuously keep on changing. The friends that we had in our childhood, maybe some of them are still around, we now have new friends. We have moved from one city to another. Different experiences. And what remains with us are only these different sets of impressions. And they'll be continuously changing. And so this entire living experience can be just seen as these scenes which are just moving before our eyes. And that is what samsara is. Please protect me from death. Now death, again, this topic will also come throughout this book. Death, why are we afraid of death? It's a big subject, but I will just mention only one thing. There is this instinctive fear of there is a term, which is a philosophical term, called non-being. So, I am, I exist, and somehow anything that threatens my existence, threatens my being, I'm afraid of it. I want to run away from it. I don't want to be threatened. Now, death seems like it's threatening my existence. So, because right now I am, and after death, I will no longer be. That's why death is a problem. And what Vedanta would say is, when I say I am, who is this I? I am the spirit. And what is death? Death is the destruction of this body. So what will go away at death is the body. But I still am. I am not the body. Therefore, death can do nothing to me. The body is a perishable object in this world, just made of atoms and molecules. We know its chemical composition, although the way we would go to a laboratory and check chemical compositions of things, we don't like to think about this body as something else to be dissected in a laboratory, but it is just a part of this world. And so it is perishable. And that which is perishable, well, will perish. Now, all of this, intellectually, is kind of, we can objectively kind of appreciate and understand and say, yeah, that makes sense. But we are not just intellectual beings. There are feelings, emotions, attachments involved. And this body, therefore, I cannot objectify the body the way I'm able to objectify this computer or this book or whatever is in front of me. And that is why the fear of death comes, because death seems like a threat to my own being, to my own existence. And that is why the student says, please protect me from death. I don't know anyone else in whom I can take refuge. Verse 37. Shanto mahanto nivasanti santo vasantavat loka hitam charantaha tirna swayam bhima bhavarnavam janan ahetu nanyan apitarayantaha. There are calm and noble saints who, like the spring, live for doing good to others. Having themselves crossed the terrible ocean that this world is, they save other people as well without expecting anything in return. So this verse gives very briefly the nature of the enlightened being. And there will be other verses later on in the book which will elaborate on this theme. An important or interesting phrase here is like the spring. So we know, and right now there is this saying, if winter comes, shall spring be far behind? Yes, in New England, it's still very far behind. It's not, but we know. We don't know how long this winter will last, but we know that at the end of it, the spring will come. And it always brings great joy. All these trees which have become barren, you'll find again greenery arriving, grass sprouting, flowers coming. It makes us so happy. Like the spring, that's the phrase that is used here, because it's the nature of that season to make people happy. Spring doesn't arrive and say, oh, I've got my duty now, I've got to make people happy and I need to go. Spring is just being spring. It's just being what that season is. But by its very nature, we become happy. Every morning when the sun comes, we don't know what the sun is thinking, but I doubt the sun is saying, oh, I have to go and give heat and light to this crazy planet called the Earth. Or I'm mad at them, I'm angry at them, I'm not going to give them heat and light. I don't think so. It's the nature of the sun to provide heat and light. That's who the sun is. Exactly in the same way, when enlightened beings do good to the world, they help us. That's not their duty. They don't have any responsibility to do it. But that's who they are. They bless the world. They do good to the world by just being themselves. So if we are truly good, we don't have to think, oh, I'm good now and I must go and make everybody good. We don't have to do that. If I'm good and truly good, then only good words will come from me. Good thoughts will come out of me. Whatever actions I do will be good. as I said before, my good thoughts and actions should be an expression of the goodness inside my heart. And that's what these enlightened beings are. So whatever good they do it without expecting anything in return. Verse 38. Ayam svabhava swatayeva yat para shramapanoda pravanam mahatmanam sudham shuresha swayamarka karkasha prabhavi taptam avatikshitim kila. Such is the nature of great souls. They spontaneously remove the suffering of others. They are like the moon which cools the earth, scorched by the burning heat of the sun. Spontaneously is an important word here. Swata eva. It happens naturally. They don't have to will themselves to do it. Verse 39. Brahmananda rasanubhuti kalitaihi putai sushitair yutaihi yushmat vakkalashodjitai shruti sukhair vakyamrutai sechaya sataptam bhavatapadadvadahana jvalabhirenam prabho dhanyaste bhavadikshana kshanagate patri krita svikritaha. It's very poetical. Shankaracharya, besides being such a great philosopher, a great poet, and the simplicity of the language, it's so uplifting. O Master, scorched as I am by the burning heat of the forest fire of the world, please sprinkle on me the sacred, cooling, pure, and nectar-like soothing words of the Vedas, powered by the experience of the bliss of Brahman, issuing from your lips as from a pitcher. Blessed are those who receive your compassionate look and are accepted by you. Next verse. This is the last one we'll do today. Katham tareyam bhavasindhu metam kava gatirme katamostyupayaha janena kinchit kripayavamam prabho samsara dukkha kshatimatanushva. How do I cross the ocean that this world is? What is in store for me? What should I do? I have not the slightest idea about this. The student is probably saying what probably many of us will be saying in our own hearts. Please protect me, O Master. Please destroy this sorrow of worldly existence. And then next week we will see what the teacher responds to this very eloquent pleading by the disciple to the teacher. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So, if you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions? Yeah.
Maharaj, namaskar, thank you very much. One thing I would like to mention that I got an answer, and I was so happy to hear that when someone wants to do a seva, he should think like why sun comes every morning just to, is it for his duty he's coming? It's in nature.
Yeah.
So that's a good understanding to me.
Thank you.
And then I have a question. The impressions are there in human being, and there are some impressions which takes me to some pleasure like eating, seeing, things like that. But there are some impressions where we received some devotional experiences. And if we like to go to that places again and again, and the situation doesn't allow us, then what should we do?
Say that second part again. If you have a devotional
experience, like went someplace and where we did prayer and had some experience of divine. So if we cannot do that, we like to do that again and again, but because of external situations like COVID situations or distance or whatever, then how can I get that experience again?
Yeah, please. One good thing about spiritual practice, about remembering the divine or even practicing meditation, we don't really have to go out anywhere, really. So there will be, because of the pandemic and things like that, there will be some external restrictions like travel and going to this place or meeting people that we would like to meet. But I think as far as the spiritual practice itself is concerned, while some of these external things might be helpful, such as pilgrimage and going to temples, etc., which we may not be able to do to the same extent in the present situation, but in such times we can just meditate within our own heart and pray. I strongly believe in the power of prayer. So if we pray, there is some, again, this cannot be rationally explained, but a prayer coming sincerely from the heart, I don't know how, but there is the external situation somehow manipulates itself in a way that removes many of our difficulties. Or if our difficulties are not removed, then a devotee thinks the time hasn't come yet. Because about answering prayers, as I said, usually when we say prayers are answered or not, we are assuming that yes is the only answer. But if I pray for something and I don't get it, a devotee will say the prayer has been answered with a no. Yep.
Swamiji. Swamiji, in the same way where there's the cycle of impression leading to desire, leading to intention, leading to fueling the further desire, what is the cycle that emboldens the willpower? Is it when we deny the intention that the willpower becomes stronger or stronger? What can we do?
Yes, a way of strengthening the willpower is actually leading a very uncompromising ethical and moral life. Because a compromised existence, it's very difficult to have a strong willpower. Because one's freedom gets compromised. But I think to hold on to certain values and principles, to hold on to just basic ethics and morality, goes a long way in strengthening our power of the will, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Swamiji, many emotions are, very strong. One of I consider myself as a spiritual seeker, but expectation. And I try to get rid of that because I know that expectation brings sorrow, but I don't see expectation as a negative. I see as a learning. If I get disappointed, I know what not to do. But still, when I get happy, I get what I want, that brings me my desire. So how do I balance that?
No, I think being happy is fine. Being happy is not, I don't think being happy is not an expression of desire. So if there is things that make me happy in life, we should be happy. See, being spiritual doesn't mean that we have to be serious all the time. In fact, you read throughout the Gospel of Ramakrishna, how often we'll find in parentheses laughter, all laugh. I mean, there's many of these great teachers, they taught through stories, through parables, jokes. Ramakrishna, Vivekachudamani, when he came here, he used to so much laugh that sometimes people who in the West 100 years ago, the stereotypical idea of a spiritual person was someone with a very grave and long face. And so when Swamiji used to laugh, someone asked him, "Why do you laugh so much? It's not good for spiritual people to be laughing." And then Swamiji says, "We are the children of the blissful Divine Mother. And so the source of all bliss is this infinite being. Why should we be sad and morose?" And then he said, "But sometimes I'm a bit sad when I have a stomach ache or a headache." Something like that. So, yeah, of course, I think you see, there is a difference between being happy and being hyper. You see? So, what Swami Vivekananda, it's one of his quotes, which I like very much. He said, "By being pleasant always and smiling, it takes you nearer to God, nearer than any prayer." That's a very profound statement. If I can be praying all day and just being such a sad, long face all the time, that prayer will lack that power. But if I try to remain cheerful and smiling, I will have more energy. My quality of my meditation and prayer will be better. Now, it's easy to be cheerful and smiling when things are going well. That's you don't have to struggle for it. And that's easy. But being cheerful and smiling, even when things are not going well, that would need some effort. But it's very, very helpful. Even in the darkest of hours, you don't have to be like, people will think you're crazy if something terrible has happened and you keep off laughing out loud. But it's just being calm and cheerful. Because in that state of mind, we are in a better position to know what should be done, what should not be done, to make the right choices in life. So consider being pleasant and being smiling. Well, nowadays all of our faces are covered anyway, but whether you're smiling or not, nobody can see. But we know inside. Others may not know whether we are smiling or not, but we know whether we are smiling or not. And you see, a smiling face is always a very beautiful face. And no matter how wonderful one's features might be, but an angry face is always very ugly. And then one other thing, kind of a very practical tip. If you are getting irritated at any time, at anyone, and you think you are now going to get mad and get angry, force yourself to smile at that time. Because it's very difficult to be nasty and angry when you are smiling. Because oftentimes we get angry and we say something stupid and then later on we regret. But if you force yourself to smile, then you will not be able to get angry at that time. So if you have problem with temper, smiling is a good way to overcome it. Yeah. Okay, so we will stop here today. Next week we will begin with verse 41, the response of the teacher to whatever the student has said so far. So next Sunday we'll have the satsang and our topic will be overcoming fear. Next Wednesday we'll continue with this study, and on Saturday we'll have meditation at 6 o'clock. So we'll conclude with the prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.